Okay, so as you might have heard, Cracker Barrel just did their first rebrand in 47 years. And then the internet promptly lost their mind, and within a week or so, they went right back to the original. Everybody is talking about the politics and the cultural backlash, but as someone who's designed brands for the last 15 years, I think we're missing the actual design problem here. So this week, I spent way too much time coming up with my own brand design of what I would have done if they had asked me to do the redesign. Because honestly, I kind of think this whole controversy could have been avoided with a little bit more design thinking. So let's jump into it. If we're just meeting, I'm Janelle. I've been a freelance graphic designer for about 15 years now, and I spend a lot of my time on design strategy and logo design for companies. And when I saw this Cracker Barrel rebrand blow up all over social media, my first thought was not on all of the cultural stuff. It was on the design strategy. So I'm not going to get into the politics of the pushback and whether or not they should have gone backwards, but I do think there were some really valid design reasons why they needed a rebrand. We're going to get into what those kind of are and why I think they could have gone about it in a way that everyone would have been more happy with. The center of this story is really the heart of all brand strategy problems, which is how do you create a responsive, useful set of graphics that will adapt with you as your needs adapt, but also keep the heart and soul of what makes you unique as a company. And that's a hard line to walk. Hi, baby. This is Toby. He really wants to be in this video. All right, you guys settle. All right, we're doing this one dog on lap. All right, so first let's talk about what actually needed to be fixed, because I think the larger cultural conversation is sort of overshadowing some of the larger design challenges here. I'm going to be honest, when I first heard that they redesigned the logo to remove the portrait, I kind of assumed there was some sort of problematic cultural references, as had been the case with similar brands in the past, like Aunt Jemima or the Washington Redskins, and I thought that must be what was going on here. Turns out that wasn't the case here at all. As I was researching this, I learned a couple of things. Number one, Cracker Barrel was only created in 1969, and it was actually only made as a restaurant that would go along with the owner's gas stations to help drum up more business so that people would stay longer while they were filling up their gas and eat it. He modeled it after the general stores of the 1900s to make it feel kind of connected to Americana, but it was made in the 70s. Number two, Cracker Barrels were real things. Turns out that inside general stores, shipments of soda crackers would come in these giant barrels, and people would gather around them to hang out in the store. And the owner wanted to make this same kind of convivial vibe in his restaurant, hence the name. So turns out nothing problematic here. Number three, a few years later, the owner asked a designer named Bill Hawley to help him create a better logo for the company. He came up with the idea of making the silhouette of an old man that would give sort of nostalgia and warmth and a mascot to connect with. So he took out a napkin and drew out this little silhouette of a man that wasn't actually a person. He just called him Old Timer, and they scanned that in and used that illustration as is, pretty much exactly as it was, until they did a little bit of line work updating in 2015. So that is the evolution of the Cracker Barrel logo. Now, it turns out that the owner also had an uncle named Uncle Herschel. And over the years, he became the sort of unofficial brand ambassador for the company. And so over time, they ended up referring to Man on Logo as Uncle Herschel. So for the rest of this video, I'm going to call him Uncle Herschel because I think it's charming and they should really lean into that. So that's the backstory. Turns out this rebrand wasn't made from some cultural sensitivity or wokeness. It was actually just kind of a pragmatic one. Here's the thing. The original logo is pretty charming. Problem with it is that there's only one variation. And what they're calling a logo is not really a logo. It's more like a brand illustration. And when you have this weird badge shape and this very detailed illustration, and you try to apply that to different kinds of application, like say, a website banner or a social media account, you're going to quickly run into problems because it wasn't meant to stretch that way or that small. So honestly, I can absolutely see why a new CEO would come in and say, hey, we need a brand refresh. I kind of get it. So here's what I think happened. They brought in a new CEO in 2024 to address declining sales after COVID and a very aging customer base. They want to attract younger people, so the obvious train of thought is younger equals modernize and simplify. right? I don't know what happened, but this feels like the classic case of design by committee, where instead of spending a ton of time in the strategy phase, they jump straight to problem solving the things that they needed to get dealt with, instead of taking a ton of time to ask, what makes people love us in the first place? Why would someone choose to hang out at our restaurant instead of somewhere else? And that's where I think it gets a bit murky. So let's put on our brand strategy hats and pretend that we're all in this meeting together, right? If we were going through the brand discovery process, here's what I think we would have found. First, people mainly stop at Cracker Barrel when they're driving along the highway as part of a long road trip. When you're on a 6-hour drive and your legs need a break and you're tired of eating at McDonald's, Cracker Barrel gives you a nice, convenient stop to eat a meal, let the kids run around or dogs, use the good bathrooms, and just take a bit of a breather before you get back on the road. And that's what makes them unique. That actually sets them apart from pretty much everyone else in the sort of fast food road trip world. That's really special. You settle? You went down? Okay. We lost Toby. Number 2, yeah, there's an older demographic here. I grew up going to Cracker Barrel with my grandparents when we were on long road trips. But young people also take road trips, and they have a nostalgic connection because they grew up going there with their families. Which means that the family-friendly nature of the brand expands pretty naturally to a younger demographic without needing to strip away all its personality. And here's the thing about Gen Z, obviously spoken as a millennial. They love kitschy and nostalgic and weird. So stripping down all of the antique grandma's attic vibes and making it very like modern farmhouse is kind of the antithesis of what someone actually wants when they're on a long road trip wanting to have like a kitschy fun experience. I don't want everything to be minimal and modern. They want it to be aesthetic and weird. A perfect example of this is the gas station brand Buc-ee's. Now, if you are not in the southern United States, you might not know what I'm talking about, but there are kind of 3 gas station brands that have weirdly large, beloved fan bases. They're roughly regional around the United States, and those are Sheetz, Wawa, and Buc-ee's. But unlike the other 2, Buc-ee's has gone all in on this very weird animal mascot. There's merch, there's games, there's giant things you can take your photo with, and it's created this like deeply beloved cultural icon to the point that people are Buc-ee's stans. Whether or not they're gonna stop there for their gas, they feel like a part of this weird cult of gas station. And this company is primed for that. They already have a weird mascot. Lean in harder. All right, so in my fantasy where I was doing the strategy for Cracker Barrel, here's what I would have recommended. Don't get rid of Uncle Herschel. Make him the star. Get him on merchandise and make a lot of ways for people to engage with this mythology. But at the same time, you also need an adaptable, useful logo suite that can be used on a lot of different applications with and without the drawing. Not that complicated. I would lean hard in this general store vibe. The history of hand-painted signage that has a lot of expression, even though it's really legible. There's a lot of ornamentation and badges and little bits that make it feel kind of part of history. I love how a lot of these brands are newer, but they feel historical because they have a lot of different elements that can be used in a lot of different ways. They're very type heavy and they've got a lot of ornamentation, different badges and stamps and styles that can be used in a lot of different expressions. You see this kind of heavy shadow in a lot of antique signage. I think that's something that could immediately associate with this is an old general store, even if you're not screaming it. And lastly, take the illustration style and run with it. I love how these brands use these handmade illustrations to really tell a whole story of all of the things that are involved in the brand. And I think that could be really natural here. So with all that being said, this is the original logo with Uncle Herschel in all his glory. Like I said, it's a pretty cool mark, but all of this detailing just makes it impossible to use in smaller sizes. Just look at what happens when they embroider it into the aprons that all the staff wear. His face becomes like the stuff of nightmares, and that is not great. Secondly, this weird shape is apparently a pinto bean. I don't feel like that's a part of the nostalgia that people have for this at all, and it's just a weird, bad shape. So I say we get rid of that completely. I actually really like this type treatment. I think it has a lot of personality, but I agree with them that it needed to be refined a little bit and cleaned up just to be a little bit easier to use. So this is what they did with it. And honestly, it's not a bad type treatment. I think they still have some personality. The R's are pretty fun. It's just a little bit minimal and it's lacking a lot. I think the idea was that this sort of minimal shape was supposed to be a barrel. If they had just taken the straps on the barrel and added them to it, I think a lot of this would have been solved. because at least then it would have seemed like they were trying to connect the two. But as it stands, it just feels like they're taking out all the soul. So here's my version. It's kind of somewhere in between the two with the typography. I started with a typeface that I felt like already had some good character. I really liked the K in the original, and I wanted to find a K that had a similar kind of vibe. And then I did a fair amount of tweaking to make this feel more custom. I didn't like the A of the original, so I designed my own A that felt friendly and soft and kind of like the original one, but had some character to it. And I made these R's with a custom serif, so they all kind of tucked in each other, and I thought it helped reinforce that barrel shape. And then I added back in the old country store from the original mark. I feel like that's actually an important part of the story, and I don't see any reason why you can't have at least a version that has that. I got rid of the pinto bean, but I gave a badge that felt like it was part of old signage that you would see in a general store. I think it's okay to lean hard on texture and grit in this case because you want it to feel like it has character. And lastly, I gave Uncle Herschel just a bit of a makeover. I kept him, but I streamed him down a little bit and just cleaned up some of the lines so that it would be a little bit easier to reduce down into small sizes. And I gave him a lighter background so that when you zoomed out, it didn't read as like one big brown blob. And then I did an alternate mark, sans Herschel, so that you could still use the same kind of badge, but not always with the drawing. I felt like it needed one more tagline, and I really like the phrase America's front porch. I think this image of a front porch rocking chair waiting for you in every state is very evocative and sort of sums it all up. So I ran with that as an alternate mark just to have some variation. But as I've already named, one badge logo does not cut it for a logo suite. I think if they had done this one thing, it would have solved all the problems. Just take Mr. Herschel out, use him as a graphic, and move him around a little bit. Give some variations without a badge, that are horizontal, that are stacked in different directions. By isolating him as a drawing, we can move him to different sides of the logo depending on what we need in the application. He is a free-roaming Herschel, and he's free to move around the screen as we need him to. And because not every use needs a drawing, I also made some without it. There are stacked versions, both with the slogan and without. There's a nice clean horizontal version that could be used on t-shirts with another graphic on top of them, for example. And what I'm pretty sure this whole rebrand was about, I made some social media icons. I took the same CB monogram idea that they had, but I also tried to give it a little bit more personality so that you would still associate it with Cracker Barrel. I thought that by adding in more badge detailing or actually putting in the barrel, that way if you're looking on an app screen, you can still recognize what it is. This could literally mean Central Bank. So I think continuing to have a bit more personality, even in small sizes, is pretty important. But because I'm a little bit extra, I felt like we could push it one step farther. I had this image in my brain of a farm stand with all those really expressive stickers that go on fruit. I thought we could make a series of sub-brands that could serve as stamps and stickers and things for when you don't always need to slap the same logo on everything. I'm using the same elements over and over again and starting to create this sort of nostalgic old-time feeling, but in a way that gives a lot more options for different expressions. So I could have stopped there with the logos, but to make this a full brand suite, we need to fill in a few gaps. First, we need to define a color palette. I just did a whole video on this, and this is a great example of a hero palette. This yellow and brown is already working for them. It's pretty recognizable. I say don't mess with it. But I do think we need to add some supplemental colors to just give some options for extra ways that the brand could be used. Now, the rebrand did this too, but the supplemental palette that they chose was brighter and poppier, and I think they were going just younger. I was thinking in terms of some colors that would feel at home in Grandma's kitchen, and like they could all be a part of the same like linen fabric. I still want to make sure I have some lighter neutrals, some accents, and some deeper colors so that I can use them accessibly for whatever I need, but I wanted to make them all feel a little bit more toned down and a little bit more subtle. Next, I wanted to define typography. I feel like this is one of the places where they went really corporate. They chose a pretty straightforward sans serif without a lot going, and I think you could really have some fun with the personality of like a headline font that could be used on menus and as advertising. And I think that was kind of a missed opportunity. So my idea was to lean into that general store signage with that heavy shadow. I found two fonts that I felt like worked together pretty well. They had a slight rough texture. They're still pretty legible, but they just give a little bit more presence. And I like how we can start to create a visual language for a lot of marketing and advertising copy that you could use all over the place. Finally, I wanted to push out my favorite part of a brand, which is some of the more fun brand extensions that really bring the thing to life and give you a lot of room to play. I already drew out a version of Uncle Herschel, so I pulled out my iPad and drew a couple of other illustrations of things that are really iconic to the brand. Rocking chairs and barrels and the peg game that's on every table. And then I decided that I wanted a bit more. So I drew out a few more things, I found some other illustrations on Envato Elements, and I brought them all together to create this sort of plethora of old-timey country kitchen kind of illustrations. I wanted ingredients that would go in a stew, iced tea that you would have on a porch, obviously the rocking chairs, but also like rolling pins and kettles and things that would be in a country kitchen. And I also wanted to reference some of the antiques that are plastered all over the walls in a Cracker Barrel. I think this is a way to really honor the kitschy grandma's attic aesthetic in a way that feels pretty modern. And any one of these illustrations could be pulled out and used as a spot illustration in the future for advertising or motion graphics or anything. So it gives the design team a lot of room to play. You're creating a whole visual world here and creating a lot of room for the future. So obviously I had to do my favorite thing, which is to turn these into a brand pattern, and then see what they would look like in the different colors of the palette. And this is how you start creating a whole visual language that a brand can speak in. You could take this same pattern and put it on a tote bag, and I think people would buy it. And that becomes unique. The last thing I did was add in a few more supplemental patterns that could be used for bits and bobs on menus and merchandise and just give a little bit more use to this brand. I feel like going into this country linen vibe makes a lot of sense. So I made some gingham and checks and florals, and I love this basket weave texture that I feel like could be really useful. Just things that read Southern grandma's kitchen and then could be used in a lot of different ways. I feel like it just gives more of an arsenal of things to play with in the future. So then I just kind of had to see how this would all play together. So this is the website that the rebrand team came up with. And after the backlash, they took off the new logo and put back the old logo. And I think you can see just what the problem is with the old logo. It reads terribly on a website. And this is kind of what I'm envisioning. It's not revolutionary, but I think you can see how just having a nice horizontal version of the logo means that when you have something like a website URL, you have a really natural place to put it. And by having a few more elements to play with, like a brand pattern and some textures and a typographic treatment, you start being able to create things more naturally. Things come together in different combinations a lot more easily, and you start to have a lot of recognition across all of your different brand elements. Because I mainly experienced this brand seeing their giant billboards letting me know when there's a restaurant, I wanted to show what a version of that could look like. And I think we're starting to get a vibe going. Nothing about this is going to break your mind, but by extending the life of the old brand, we're able to modernize it a little bit and create more of a visual language without completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And then just for fun, I threw in a few packaging ideas because I was just having fun playing at this point. I love thinking about how takeout containers could have little shots of pattern on the side, and you could use the different stamps on different sides of the packaging. I love how this brand pattern would lay out on a placemat or on the wax paper that they wrap food up with. So you bring out your fries and you've got this cool pattern on it. Obviously, you need a bag to pack up all the souvenirs that you buy in the country store, and I think you could end up having a lot of fun by putting different slogans on each one. And most importantly, you need something to take your coffee to the car with, and this starts getting a real vibe to it. It would make me want to stop here versus going to a gas station. Ultimately, I just feel like this was an object lesson in exactly why you need adaptable logo suites. No company can survive on one logo alone, and I think this proves it. This was a lot of fun to put together. I actually have a whole series where I design brands for dream clients, so I'll put that list here if you want to watch some other ones that I've made. And I would love to know, how do you think I did? Did I improve the rebrand or not really? Let me know. I'll see you next time.